All right. We are live and up and running. Let's get everything loaded up, make sure our sound is good, and we will go ahead and get started for today. There we go. Looks like everything is loaded. I'm gonna up my mic gain a little bit. I'm just trying to speak a little bit closer when I'm talking normally. When I'm actually making noises, I think it's set about where it needs to be. I kind of flipped the dynamics and EQ settings so it's not super loud. But let me turn on a quick beat that I threw together before we started, just to get some background noise while I explain what we're going to do today. And I'll clear this off when we actually get to work on some loop station stuff. So today for the jam stream, we're going to be running through some more practice related stuff. I actually have been thinking all week about topics for discussion, things I wanted to talk about with everybody. And I definitely want to continue the discussion we were having about the speed training. In fact, let me see if I can get my metronome set up now so I don't have to do it on the fly later. Okay, I guess it's saved from whatever setting I had from one of our previous sessions, so that's good. That should be audible. Doesn't need to be super loud, but if I need to adjust it, I can. For purposes later, we'll keep that the way it is, and if I need to make the click track louder, I will. So when we get to sound theory and technique discussion, I'm definitely going to be talking through kind of an extension of last time where we talked about using things like the metronome to train for speed in beatboxing. Sort of a follow-up to the discussion with some other techniques. We talked about the basics, like primarily snares when we were looking at this last time, and talking about speed. We were looking specifically at snares. So I'd like to continue that discussion with some other parts of the instrument kit and kind of illustrate how speed training works, at least how I've been doing it. Let me see, let me try and tweak something with my audio here. I'm going to put dynamics up a little bit higher. Maybe we can leave it about there. And I can drop mic gain sensitivity down. People let me know as we go if I need to tweak my mic settings or if it's hard to hear me. It just looks like my output's a little bit lower than usual. But we'll keep it about there for now, and then I'll keep an eye on it when I actually start working on sounds, make sure we're not going like super high audio peaks, nothing like that. So we'll talk through some practice stuff, more discussion on speed training. We'll work that into kind of some drills and examples, just like we did last time. And then for the BGM stuff today, it'll be kind of similar to the previous couple sessions. I do have Synthesizer Kun hooked up, but I have it turned off so it's not giving any feedback. Once we actually switch over to BGM stuff, I'll turn it on, and I'll have to make sure I'm careful with my boost so I'm not recording static. I'll probably bring the Casio back at some point. The reason why I haven't been including the Casio synth on these recent jam streams is mostly because the instrument set's a little bit limited. It's a smaller instrument. It doesn't have a ton of instrument presets. And also because it has a timeout feature, which I need to see if I can find a manual online since I don't have a physical copy with the instrument. But if you let the keyboard sit too long, it just turns off. And it creates kind of an audio static feedback blip when it does that. So if I'm recording something and it happens to turn off, it'll pop in the recording, which would be really annoying. I want to avoid that at all costs. But the instrument set for the Casio is pretty interesting because it's a MIDI keyboard. So we'll bring that one back at some point. Maybe I can hook both of them up. But I think we can go ahead and let's go ahead and clear the sample loop off. We'll go ahead and run through some warm-ups to get the blood flowing, and then from there we will go ahead and get started. And I'll keep an eye on the sound levels and make sure everything sounds all right as we go. So let's begin the warm-up and jump right in. Seems like my BGM snare might need a little bit more warming up than usual today. Just thinking about it in the warm up and practice, there it goes. For some reason, like I've talked about on other streams, For some reason, that one always seems to require different varying levels of warm up. I guess it depends on how actively I've been doing beatboxing stuff throughout a day. Like if I just wake up, have done nothing, usually it takes a bit more warm up to get the to be super clean. Versus if it's later in the day, I've been kind of noodling around at practice stuff all day long, then I don't really need to do as much. That tells me if I was ever doing like competitive beatboxing or things on stage or battles, I would probably have to warm that one up specifically if I'm including it as part of routine or some sort of pattern, just because doing it perfectly clean and normal, as it were, seems to be a little hit or miss. And it could be that's just a lot of practice, maybe more practicing on just being able to pull that one out and have it sound normal and not require warm up. Might just be more conditioning and practice down the road. But I could tell of all the different snares specifically that I know, that's the one that seems to have the most variance. And sometimes it's really sharp, and we may see it as the stream progresses with the, which already I could tell it sounds a little bit better than when I was doing it in pattern and warm up practice just a sec ago. But it's weird. Just maybe it's because of the lip strength required to do that one. It's not muscles that are normally as warmed up and limber. But I have noticed that, so I'm gonna have to keep an eye on the BGM and kind of see as it changes as we go. But I think we can move on from warm up. So let me change my caption. So we'll call this sound theory and practice. There we go. I got my keyboard in front of me this time instead of off to the side. Just need to be careful that my loop station wires don't accidentally hit my keys and screw something up in OBS. So for the discussion on speed, again, this is a bit of a continuation from the last time we were talking about the stuff on stream. What we were talking about before was ideas of how to practice when it comes to beatboxing for increased speed and accuracy when it comes to basic techniques. So not really specifically something more intermediate to advanced like the technicality discussion. It's kind of relative and relevant. But what we talked about was breaking down the individual sounds for the Beatbox toolkit. And we focused on snares, like the big 4 or so snares that I use last time, and kind of explaining how by using something like a metronome, or turn it back on, using something that has a specific meter and an automated rhythm. I'm not going to leave that on the whole time while I'm talking, but things like the metronome give your brain training for keeping on time and keeping consistent. So even when you're just starting out versus when you're way advanced and pro level beyond anything that I'm capable of doing, there's always value in training and practicing with the metronome because it's reinforcing that kind of mental acuity when it comes to staying on time, being able to manage sounds. And so we talked about, let's see, what did I set this at? This is set at 100 beats per minute, which, for the sake of illustrating things with speed, we'll use that as a base, and then kind of like last time, maybe we go in 20 beat per minute increments for ratcheting it up and showing how as it speeds up, you kind of practice the speed, or ramp the speed up as it goes for the practice. So I think we'll do that when we go 100, or actually we'll do 90 first. We'll do it in even 20s or 30s. We do 30s last time. Let's do 30s starting at 90. There we go. So that's at 90. We'll go like 90, 120, 150, 180 as we did last time. And so in the discussion before about using the metronome for speed training, we talked about snares. And I'll recap just a little bit since it was kind of a long discussion. If people are curious about how we started off talking about speed training, you can always check out the archives and the VODs. That VOD might have expired here, but it will always be on my YouTube channel unless there's a problem with my archive footage. After the streams, I upload them there so that people can see what we covered if they happen to miss the streams here live. And so if we turn the metronome on, and real quickly, just to talk about how we apply this to snares. So on a simple 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we started with PFs, I believe, one of the elementary snare types that you learn in beatboxing. So just doing it on the click, 1, 2, 3, 4 per measure. Just practicing that as a base starting point. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you would just practice this over and over again when you're starting out. Try and be as accurate and consistent as possible while getting the sound to come out. If you're just learning the technique, you've been practicing the snare for, let's say, a week, just learning it, you probably want to focus on just doing the sound consistently at a slow beat per minute. You don't want to ramp up to high speed when you're still learning because you don't have the muscle memory, and it'll be tougher to ramp up to higher speeds when you don't have quite a bit of control over the sound. And I think we talked about before how for some people that are trying to learn quickly, it can be a little frustrating to start at such a basic level, but it will definitely make it easier later if you have more of a foundation in the building blocks early on than trying to jump into the more advanced stuff, because then you're basically trying to catch up, and it's a lot more difficult to do that. A lot of the pro beatboxers I've talked to have definitely urged people to, again, start with basics and work your way up. And it's a grind, but if you learn to walk before you run, it'll be easier in the long term. So taking the 90 beats per minute again, we'll do the incremental increase of speed just so I can illustrate what we did last time. If we crank it up to 120, a little bit faster, but same exercise with the PF snare. And this is the only snare I'm going to demo this on as a recap for last time. And we'll move on from here to the stuff I wanted to apply for speed training discussion today. So moving a little bit faster. 1, 2, 3, 4. So forcing a little bit more rapid control over air, just getting the sound to come out a little bit faster. That's pretty good practice. If I was going to be starting from basic level, I'd probably start at about 120 because it's fast, but it's not unmanageably fast. If we crank up to 150, now we're essentially on more rapid fire eighth notes. So we 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, this is fast quarters, I believe. So it'd be. And that's definitely pushing more speed. I don't do a lot of fast PF snares in my patterns, and I'm trying to work on incorporating some more stuff with that, since it sounds cool if you can do it rapidly, but it's very difficult compared to some of the other snares, at least the outward breath snares. But if we go up to 180, now it's fast. This is eighths. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so doing it on the click for this one, PF snare, this is pushing my speed limit for the PF snare, but we go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it starts to lose a little bit of accuracy at the end. And one thing I've noticed, just in doing this a bit in practice and kind of offline as I'm away from streaming and content, what I noticed with the PF snare specifically that is directly the result of just practicing this off and on more recently, I'm able to do the PF snares faster than before. It's not, like a double speed capability type thing, but just thinking about the sound, before I could maybe do about as fast as we just did with at 180. But just pushing it and practicing it, if I try and just as fast as I can on a click, do the PF snares, it ends up coming out kind of like a little bit faint because it's not really that well practiced yet, but that's way faster than I could do that maybe a month ago. I could probably not get much faster than on the beat on 180 before it starts to get super muddy. And so that's pretty decently fast. I think that's close to 16s. It's double. I think it's double. Yeah, if we compare it to, yeah, it's about half time of that essentially. And so I can see that it does make a difference because I don't really practice PF snares for speed. But just to illustrate the benefits of working with metronome practice, it does make a difference. And if I keep practicing and pushing it, maybe I can get really clean, like rapid fire machine gun PF snares, which is, again, not something I've seen. I did talk about the Darney video where he was doing kind of a speed competition with his friends, and his was like a 30-second note machine gun. That's crazy. I think it'd be really cool to have that level of control and accuracy. So that's what I'm going to be working towards when it comes to the speed training on that particular sound, and we'll kind of see what the results are when we get there. But if I'm going to crank this back down to 90. What I want to talk about for discussion today in sound theory is this whole idea of the speed training, but for other instruments and sounds in the Beatbox toolkit. We'll do some of the basic ones, and then we'll also mix in some of the more advanced ones so folks watching this can see how the whole concept of practicing with metronome to control speed works for things that aren't just a snare. And I think the best place to start is a sound we touched on briefly before, but we didn't spend a ton of time practicing. I probably should have because it's really important for basics, but we'll cover it now just to be a little bit more thorough, and that's kicks. Bass drum kicks are integral to virtually everything you do in beatboxing. With some exceptions, you're almost never going to have a beat that you're constructing that doesn't have some sort of bass kick in it. Again, it doesn't mean every single thing under the sun, but in a lot of cases, the basic type beats are going to have some sort of bass drum kick as like the backbone of the rhythm and percussive parts of the beat. And I think kicks are probably the first thing people learn, so I'm not really going to spend a lot of time talking about the mechanics of the technique. When you talk about the real stereotypical example of boots and cats, the kick is just the boots, the B sound without any vocalization. So instead of a boo, it's an unvocalized sound with your lips using pressure outwards. And that's where the whole thing starts. And then as you train up kicks, you start getting more force behind it. So instead of just you might get a more powerful, more intense kick, something like, and you could do things like open your throat and hollow to get lower pitch, if you will, on the kick. So instead of it might be very subtle difference, probably not too noticeable unless you're listening real carefully. But kick is a basic sound. Everyone learns that like way at the beginning, and you kind of get used to it and you get good with it. But training the kick for speed is not something, again, we covered before, and I think it'd be important to talk about since you're not going to be doing a whole lot of 1 or 2 note kicks in the more advanced, faster patterns in beatboxing. You might start with something simple like that might be even a little bit more of an advanced example. If you just take out all the double and triple kicks I did, just that's the boots and cats. Just a simple one 1, 2, 4 count using kicks and snares, and I put hats. Yeah. Kick, snare, hats. Pretty simple, right? Well, when training for speed, beginning, and we'll start kind of at a basic level so I can illustrate what I'm talking about here. Again, 90 beats per minute with the metronome. Pretty slow, pretty manageable. And again, it's going to sound really elementary and basic, but as we ramp up in speed, I'll kind of explain this idea that I was kicking around earlier in the week. But if we take the count here and apply it to the kick, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. I need to be careful because if I do a kick directly into the mic, it's going to blast the audio peaks. I don't want to do that. But just quarter notes, just pretty simple. At the beginning, I think a lot of people should train this way when they're just starting out, just to get used to the idea of keeping time, especially if they're not musically trained like me. Me being not musically trained. I'm not musically trained at all, especially not in percussion. So I had to learn how to keep time, and I kind of did it by trial and error. I started using a metronome a bit later. If I started at the beginning, it might have been a bit easier for me, which is why I'm recommending that to people who are getting into beatboxing. But if we crank this thing up to 120, keeping our bass drum kicks about the same rhythm, but a little bit faster, following the click, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is sort of emulating like a electronic or a dance type beat, or something like you might hear in a techno song, a bit faster, but constant, consistent pace. Still pretty manageable. I think this would be like the level 2 goal for people just starting out and practicing this for a bit to get more familiar with ramping up the tempo of whatever it is you're doing and getting a little bit faster with it. We move up to 150. Now we're getting a bit more rapid in speed. If we do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're getting to a bit more of a faster, again, driving tempo. Pretty good for rock type beats. You could probably adapt this for electronic type sounds too. Nothing too crazy, just getting used to that faster pace. But if we go up to 180, now we're significantly faster compared to where we started, double the BPM. And so if we follow the beat for this one at 180, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And going through that is going to give you pretty good speed practice for a decently quick beat as you're practicing. So if I turn off the metronome for a sec, single note kicks are a really good place to start. And if I was going to work with someone who's just starting out, again, I'm not a beatbox teacher, but if someone asked me for advice on how to practice some of the basics and where to start, I would say going from like 90 to 180 beats per minute in increments for single note kicks is a great place to start, just to practice getting used to keeping time and staying on that rhythm. Now, where it gets a little bit interesting when it comes to speed is when you start working with multiple note kicks. So we have things like double kicks. And I think I'm going to do this on metronome because I've never tried it before, and I think it'll be a good way to sort of illustrate. I think double, triple kicks were the examples I thought about using for this particular demonstration. And we'll see if it makes sense. If we go back down to 90, I think this is a good place to start. So unlike the single kick example, which would be kind of like the basic ground floor level of practice, double kicks, adding 2 notes to each section that's being practiced, this is sort of like your next level up when it comes to getting more advanced and more difficult rhythms, and also practicing that same staying on time type deal. So instead of ones, we're gonna do double kicks. So just 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, and I'll kind of try and see if it is obvious as I ramp up the speeds, because this is gonna get difficult even for me as we go up to like 180, I think. But I haven't tried it, so this is a first trial run here on the stream. But again, we'll start at 90, see how it goes. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. I'm trying to think, make sure I'm explaining this correctly. Yep, I'm making sure I wasn't doing an accidental triple there. And so at 90, pretty manageable. Getting used to doing double kicks will level up early level beatbox stuff pretty quickly to kind of show a real world example instead of just a click track exercise. Your potential for mixing up the complexity of beats just by getting double kicks under control, which is, again, not terribly difficult, but when you're just learning out and trying to get the muscle memory and conditioning for the beatbox sounds, it's going to take practice because your lips and mouth muscles aren't used to making these particular types of movements. So if we go back to our original example, which was just a simple single kick, single hat, single snare. Once you start getting control over double kicks, you just start swapping things in the beat in and out to make it more complex, which is kind of a no-brainer, I understand, but just to kind of illustrate the complexity differences, if you take that same beat and you throw out the single kicks and you mix it up with double kicks, you might get something that goes from to I did a real quick and sloppy improvised version of my track Under the Ground, the very first BGM track I ever did. It's a really good kind of training example, so I've referenced it a couple times, but it shows mixing up the single double kicks. That's really all it is in the percussive line of that song, but it again adds that layer of complexity on top. So if we take our metronome, we crank up to 120, and we try and do double kicks on the beat at 120, our click sounds like. So 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Getting a little bit more difficult. Doing doubles as you ramp up in speed is going to get, I think, exponentially harder. Let's try it. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Still pretty manageable, but again, the speed is picking up. I think 150 and 180 are going to be noticeably more challenging when it comes to staying on the beat. But we'll see if I can do it. This is 150. 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Definitely more difficult, still somewhat manageable. I think I can more or less do that okay. Now we go up to 180. Now this is decently fast. We're getting into probably the speed I would say for like a drum and bass song, or like a more fast, maybe like a break beat. But doubles on the beat at 180. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a bit tougher. I have a bit more trouble regulating air when I'm doing it that fast, so I have to be really careful that I don't run out of air after 2 repeats of the measure, just because it's going fast. If we push it, go up to 210. So this is again another notch farther than we went with the other example, but doubles on the beat at 210. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It is almost constant at that point because of how fast it's going. So if we go ahead and ratchet back down, eventually the way I think I would sort of tailor the practice would be going from like singles to fast singles to just constant. And I think for 180-ish, or maybe 180 or 210, instead of doing just like I would probably try and get it as rapid as possible, like that I'm not good at. In fact, I need to practice that, like a rapid kick roll line with singles, because it's pretty useful to be able to do that quickly in different parts of a beat. And so, oh boy, how would I illustrate something like that? Maybe kind of like a staggered dubstep beat where we had something like where you have kind of like a galloping rapid kick line in between the hats and snares. That's not really something I do. I should practice that more. But a lot of potential for being able to really kind of push the speed and push the capability of just a very, very simple sound. And so the last example for kicks I want to show is a triple. So we have single, like a double. And triple's a little different because it's actually 3 sounds in one, but the middle sound's not a kick. It's a BTB. The T being just a really faint T sound with your teeth, tongue in your teeth. So it's 3 sounds in a row, but done real quickly, so it creates a triple kick sound. So the becomes, and again, done really quickly, it sounds like you're doing a triple kick, like a double bass pedal triple kick. And triple kicks are really, really useful and they're fun, but they require quite a bit of practice because you are basically bound by tongue speed and accuracy at that point. It's not really air based, it's definitely tongue and accuracy. So if we go back to 90 to demonstrate triple kicks, start slow, and it's going to be BTB on the beat, and we'll ramp it up and kind of show how it speeds up. This is going to be pushing my comfort zone for kicks. I don't train this way, and I think I'm going to need to start doing it to give myself some more tools. But if we go from bass, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Not bad. If someone's learning triple kicks, which are a bit more of an intermediate type of sound, not a recommendation for people to start off at the beginning with triples. Much better to do singles and kind of move into doubles. And when you have a really good handle on fast singles and fast doubles, then start working on triples. But if we go from 90 to 120, I think my speed limit's going to be around 150 for this, but we'll find out. So same thing, triplets on the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That requires a lot of air. You folks can't see it because my model doesn't show this, but when I'm doing this exercise, I'm actually using my left hand. I'm like chopping the air with my hand to follow the beat. It's like my body's version of a metronome. And I didn't realize I do that until I started working on these speed drills. But you have what's called like beatboxer hands, and people are out there with a mic performing, and they'll do a lot of like things with their hands as part of their movements. For speed training, I use my left hand as apparently like my meter metronome regulator. I never realized I did that. It's kind of funny. So 120 with triples. Faster. Pretty difficult, but still somewhat manageable. Now we kick it up to 150. Triplets on the beat at 150, much faster. So I think this is going to be where it starts getting difficult for me to do cleanly. We go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's definitely pushing it. In fact, I got wildly offbeat like the second round of repetitions, and I had to kind of reset it and reel it back in. So that's fast at 180. If we go up to 150, if we go up to 180, this again probably pushing my ability to do cleanly. But we go 180 on the beat, triplets. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I could feel towards the last few repetitions there. I could feel it starting to really be difficult to hit the sound and hit the sound on time. So I think I'm going to have to benchmark 180 as my speed limit for triple kicks, because that gets difficult. But if we turn that off for a sec, I think it's, again, really good practice to force someone out of their comfort zone when it comes to tempos and speeds, while just drilling in the repetition so that your mouth anatomy gets used to doing things consistently at that speed. And then your brain, which controls all of your anatomy, is used to kind of locking in and forcing itself to maintain that tempo. Let me grab some water real quick. So let me drop it back down to 90. And let's move on in the discussion for speed training. Spent a lot of time on kicks, I know, but kicks are basic, but so full of potential and fun things you can do that I think gets overlooked a little bit as a technique, because everyone thinks, you know, bass drum kicks, whatever, you do 1, 2 doubles, and people probably focus on more fun and interesting sounds. But the ability to mix up speed when you have good control over it can really elevate your technique into more interesting levels of complexity. So just to kind of illustrate everything that I've been showing off for just speed training for kicks, being able to do single, double, triple, quadruple kicks are kind of a more advanced thing for maybe a future discussion. But again, we look at our sample beat, like the, and you can do that all day long. And if you practice the real simple boots and cats in quotes type beat when you're learning, you'll definitely get good practice putting together those three sounds. but you augment that with multiple bass drum kicks, and it changes the complexity of the beat. So it would be something probably like and again, kind of a mix of techniques into one beat, I know. But if you hear just in that real short sample, all the variations of the kick rhythm, it's kind of a lot of things thrown together for the sake of the example. But again, it's adding the complexity so that you're getting used to putting all those things together, which I think is pretty handy in beatboxing. As people practice and train up, I think practicing this particular way for speed is helpful. So I would always recommend that people at least give it a try for like a month, chunking out a little bit of time every day to practicing speed and using a metronome to control, I think would be useful. All right. Moving on in speed training, we spent like 20 minutes, 30 minutes on kicks, and there's more to cover. Speed training with sounds that are not part of the basic or elementary skill set, I think, is worth mentioning. So I wanted to work in some discussion on that today. And I thought about doing a bit section of discussion in sound theory on hats. Hats, I think, require a little bit of a different strategy, but you can practice them the same way. You know, closed hats. Throw that on a metronome track. Same deal as kicks, really. But there's a bit more variation to hats just by how you're making the sound come out that I think you can train in a little bit differently than just a straight 1 note, 2 note, 3 note. And a lot of that comes down to like open hats versus closed hats, or even hi-hat runs, which I'm not super good at. But if you think of like a closed hat versus a open hat, you might be practicing real quick before we get into the next thing a pattern that's like and just practicing that rapid change in rhythm and open closed hats, like a versus very simple sounding and basic, but it does give you more practice and control, and you work that in on a metronome at higher levels of speed, and then your control over hats will definitely improve over time. And so, not really something I wanted to devote a whole section of discussion to unless people really wanted me to, but hats kind of follow a similar type of progression with kicks. But I want to talk a little bit about a more advanced sound. I'd classify this as an early advanced sound in beatboxing, but applying the idea of practicing for speed. And that's the basic lip roll, a sound that eluded me for a good year and a half of my early beatboxing career. A sound that I've talked about before. It took me forever to learn. And it turns out I wasn't necessarily practicing it correctly, and it took some experimenting before I figured it out. But I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on the lip roll now. I do it all the time. I'm okay at it. But basic lip roll sounds like it is a mouth pressure sound, no lungs required for just the basic lip roll. And it's tricky. It's one of the more popular modern beatbox sounds. It's pretty cool and fun to use. It sounds like a real kind of warbling electronic synth sound, bass synth sound. But you can take this sound and practice it for speed, which I think is pretty handy, especially once I kind of explain the way I've been practicing and drilling this thing for speed. But we start at 90. Just like all of the other sounds that we've seen so far and practiced, we would do regular lip roll on the beat and try and get it as consistent and accurate as possible. That's the challenge. So we go 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think people just learning the sound, the moment you get control enough to get the lip roll to come out and you learn the technique, I think people should practice this way early on. I didn't. I wish I had, because it would have allowed me to get better at the sound much faster. But we're going to take the idea and ramp the speed up incrementally, and then eventually I'm going to show how I do like a really, really fast one, because it's a little different than the other ones we've seen so far. Hopefully I can explain it. But let's ramp up to 120. Same thing. On the click. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I lost a little bit at the end there. This is going to actually probably tire your jaw muscles out, because without getting into the mechanics, because lip rolls are a difficult technique to explain. Part of your jaw and face muscles that create the inward pressure to get the sound to come out. You can feel it when you're doing this at length for a long time. It does put more exertion on those muscles, and if you do it for too long, your face will hurt. But going to 150 to 180, I think is going to be difficult. Same thing though, on the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh. It's definitely starting to get muddy towards the end. But it's getting difficult because as you're using mouth pressure to get the air inwards in the corner of your mouth to get the sound to come out, kind of dries that section of your mouth out, so you have to kind of reset by sort of wetting your lips real quick in between sounds. That's going to be a big factor for the fast version at 180, I think. But rapid lip rolls, good example of mastery over that type of sound would be Napalm from the States. Guy who didn't invent the technique, but he definitely helped put the technique on the map and help make it popular. The dude's lip rolls are insane, absolutely crazy. But if we go up to 180, same thing on the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's tough. Towards the second or last quarter of the repetitions, I could feel like it was breaking up pretty considerably. You actually lost a little bit of the sound as I was trying to maintain that speed for a little longer. It's also worth mentioning that because the regular lip roll uses no lungs, you can breathe normally through it, but if you try and breathe out, it'll definitely be audible on the mic. You probably heard a slight pop on the mic towards the end, and that's because I'd been breathing in so much pressure. I had to let the air out somewhere, and it just floods the mic with sound. So if you're doing a rapid pattern, I guess you'd have to sort of meter how, you're mixing up the inwards and the output, the intake and output of airflow. But that's difficult. If we ramp it up to 210, what ends up happening with the lip roll, in order to increase the speed, not only are you doing the technique faster, but it's shortening the sound itself. Like a regular lip roll without any sort of speed on its own might sound like it's got a lengthy sound to it, but at this speed, it's going to be more like very short, which is kind of an interesting way to practice because it's training your lips to cut the sound off a little bit sooner in order to get that speed. So 210, lip roll on the beat is going to be pushing it for me, but we'll see if I can do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's probably about as clean as I could do that at that speed, and I think it still starts to lag as I do it for a longer amount of time. But not bad, but definitely difficult. That would be good practice when it comes to, let me turn that off for a sec. Good practice when it comes to being able to rapidly do single lip rolls quickly. But I did want to talk about a unique sort of additional technique for lip rolls. I think I've mentioned this before, maybe a long time ago. It's been a while. For speed in lip rolls, you're not necessarily limited how fast you can do the sound using the inwards pressure on the corner of your mouth to get them. You can kind of ramp up the speed, but you can do something similar to the BTB for a triple kick, where you're mixing up the sound with another sound in order to get more speed. And to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about, if you do the regular lip roll inwards, you get them. If you breathe out while keeping that same position, you get a slightly like varied or different version of the sound. That's not a lip roll, but it sounds kind of similar, and it sounds like it's just pushing air out of the corner of your mouth, the same spot as a lip roll, keeping your lips in the same position, but instead of you're doing a kind of sounds like a fart a little bit. But if you combine that with the lip roll and you do those sounds back to back, so you're going inwards and outwards with the airflow at the same time, it lets you do the lip roll and the follow-up back to back rapidly in a way that is easier, to me at least, than doing just the lip roll constantly by itself. And so the in and out, back and forth, in and out, back to back sounds like. Let me do a little slower. And actually, it's harder to hear when it's slower. It's easier for me to do that fast. But if you were to take that, and I'm not going to go through each of the increments with the metronome, I'm just explaining how the technique works. If you start doing that faster and faster, that's how I've always done like a rapid lip roll chain, as it were. So moving a bit faster with it, it sounds like. And I'm not the first person to do that. I've heard it elsewhere too. Other people definitely have messed around with that. But it's not really a common technique that I've seen when it comes to lip roll variations, which is weird because it seems pretty useful. If you were to put it into maybe like a slight measure breakdown in a dubstep beat, you might get something like. And again, it's a little unusual. I don't know how exactly that comes across on a mic, but it's fast and it's rapid, and it's a good way to sort of show off speed and mastery for the sound. But what I think is cool about the in and out lip roll combo, I guess that's what I'll kind of call like an in and out lip roll. You do it faster and faster, it really changes the way the sound comes across. So doing it pretty fast, you can hear the lip roll. It sort of blends into the outwards, so you're getting this sort of oscillating type of noise. But you start pushing it faster than that, it becomes something that sounds like. Less of an oscillation, more like a pulse, which is kind of cool. And this is a way I practiced for just getting endurance. I didn't really use the sound in patterns and routines at all like this. It seemed kind of weird, but it's really good practice for the lip roll. You will feel it in your face muscles if you do this for like 5 minutes. But you continue to increase the speed and the sound changes again, and it goes from to. It loses a lot of the kind of warbling resonation to it and becomes like a rapid, like a bass pulse, like really rapid fire, almost like an engine. And again, I don't know how practical that is, but it is fun to do, and it is really good endurance practice for your muscles. If you tighten up the lips and go even faster and try and condense the sounds down back to back, the final sort of evolution that I've seen doing this thing at high speed, it goes from the to it actually goes way up in pitch and sounds like a really muted high speed synth. And again, I don't really know what that's called. I just know that if you push the sound of, again, this is just in and out motion I was doing before with the inwards of the lip roll, forcing the air out of that same position, just very fast and very tight. It's very sort of restricted to the corner of the mouth, and at high speeds, this is how you're getting them. And you can adjust the pitch by tightening or slightly loosening the lips. That's how you're getting it to kind of go up and down. And it's not something I see a whole lot. I think I've seen Napalm do something like that before, but definitely not common, and I have no idea if it's really that widespread of a technique. But for the sake of sound theory discussion, it is really good endurance practice. You do that at the really tight, like high speed one I just did. You do that for like a few minutes without stopping, your face will start to cramp. But it will give you so much training in endurance for those muscles that by the time you go back to them, or like the breathing inwards lip roll, you will have noticeably improved your endurance strength for making those sounds. And if nothing else, the variation, the high speed variation of the lip roll is really good training for that. And so I've done that quite a bit throughout my time since actually learning the lip roll. And it's kind of a fascinating way to just force your muscles into getting conditioned at that pressure and high speed. Next time I get a chance to talk to a pro, I might ask him if anyone I talk to, if they're really familiar with that version. And if so, like, who's the first person to really have done it? And no, it wasn't me. I can't be the first person to think of doing like a tight, fast, rapid lip roll in out like that. I can't be the first person to think of that. But as you work your way up from kind of the more simple and basic practice methods for things like a lip roll, I think working your way up to being able to do the rapids, and even if you hold it there for a while at that speed and you just practice doing that as much as you can before you have to take a rest, then, you know, give yourself a break so your face muscles don't just cramp up all at once. But you do that, practice it for a while, and then just do that every once in a while throughout the course of a week. As you work it into your practice, you'll see a lot of improvement in your lip rolls. I guarantee it, based on my experience trying to, you know, get better with the sound and get more consistent with it. And I don't hear a lot of people recommend that type of technique, so give it a try. It's nothing else is interesting, and I'll probably try and mess around with some more ideas to see if I can fit it into patterns and different actual practical uses, because I'm sure it's got potential for that too. All right. I think that will do it for sound theory discussion. Again, I only really went through two sounds as it applies to speed, but it's two very different ideas of how to practice for speed with something basic like a kick and something more advanced like a lip roll. And so I'll think probably won't do a third segment unless I can think of some sounds that I feel really are relevant. But in the future, we'll probably revisit speed and talk about maybe where I feel like the sounds have gotten, and if I come up with any other ideas for how to sort of explain like metronome training with beatbox sounds, I'll definitely return to that in the future if I can think of some stuff. Because maybe technicality on a metronome, that could be a whole discussion by itself, I think. Doing like a TKK or any sort of technicality combo chains on a metronome would be tricky. I may think about that off stream and see if I can come up with a good explanation. But we'll be talking about speed in the future, I think. It's an interesting topic of conversation when it comes to practice. But I think we are good to move on to BGM brainstorming. Let me change the caption, and then we'll get everything sort of reconfigured and then mess around with some ideas for BGM. And I will go ahead and get the synthesizer ready. I might have to tweak my volume slightly since I was working with the synth earlier in the week offline, working on some BGM ideas. But I think that'll work. What I'll do, probably kind of like we did last time, since it's an easy format to work with when it comes to just messing around with ideas, I'm going to turn my boosts off and try and put together some ideas for a beat, see where we end up, and then if people along the way have ideas or suggestions or things, we can kind of reconvene, or people can throw them out while I'm noodling around. Either is fine, but I think we'll do that for at least the first one, and then see the results and what we end up getting. So I'll turn the boosts off and start putting things together, and then we will see what results from that. Also, this is going to be a little bit soft because I turned my boost off. I'm going to turn my mic sensitivity down a bit, and then when I need to come back and talk, I'll try and remember to turn it back up to where it was. I'm gonna try something a little bit different with that rhythm. I'm trying to do the kicks and the hats first. I'm gonna do kicks and snares first, since it seems like I'm having trouble getting it to be right on the beat. It's really annoying. But I like the actual beat tempo itself, so I'm gonna try and do it with kicks and snares first. All right. Let's bring it back a little bit and take a look at what we have put together here. Let me see if turning my synth volume down, not turning it off, will reduce. Nope. Okay. Turn it off for now. It immediately reduces the feedback when that thing is not on at the same time as my boosts. So what we've got here, and I'll be able to play it back and manipulate stuff without worrying about any of the feedback. We have kind of a rock adjacent type song. It took me a minute on the beat after switching to trying to just do the kicks and snares instead of the kick hats and then snares. It was a lot easier. But the basic beat starts off with the and it's a nice double kick at the end, which ties the whole loop together. That took a couple tries to get timed properly, but I think that worked out fine. I think this could double as an RPG type track. I'll have to think about whether or not I want to keep it for the upcoming project, or at least in that collection. So we have the beat, pretty simple, and then we have an ascending, a slightly different type of bass line that mostly ascends, but it has kind of like a repeated note and then it moves. So it'll be all right. There's the top. The way I created this one was pretty simple. I used a synth bass with the guitar to bass boost to give it more low end. And then I added a string layer underneath it, or over the top really. Same note progression, just different instrument. Gives it kind of a ominous, brooding tone, which seems to be my default these days. I don't entirely know why. But I wanted to do ascending instead of descending to kind of switch up how the tone was coming across. And then on the third track, I added a choir synth. I'll drop it down a little bit lower so I can not be competing with the playback too much. So this one sort of plays around with the same progression as the bass line, but then drops down and then comes back up instead of going back up and then coming down. And then on 4 we got this is the bright synth, I believe. I did 2 chords, 2 simple chords following the note progression on the bass line and the choir synth. And then the 5th track comes in with this sliced single note. Sounds like this. It just starts and stops a couple times as the whole thing repeats. It's very simple. I don't know if I'm going to keep that final layer. It adds just a little bit of variation, and it kind of comes and goes, so you're not hearing like a constant sliced repeating single note the whole time. I definitely didn't want to do that. It would have been good with a little bit more of a fade out, I think. Maybe dropping the volume down as it cuts out each time. But if we keep it low in the mix, it'll be really kind of subtle and not overpowering for the rest of the components of the track. I'll keep it for now and we'll see. First, actually, before I do anything else, let's save our work. And what I was messing around with as I was constructing the different components of the track, just to see, is throwing on one of the pass filters over everything except the bass line. And that's how you get the... It becomes a real muted filter over the whole thing. What kind of filter is that? BPF. So not a high or low. It's like the middle of the filters. A filter transition could be fun, especially this one, which it definitely allows the lower end to kind of be at the front of the mix when the effect is turned down. As you turn it up using the intensity knob, it becomes a bit more subtle. Oh, this isn't applying to the chords, and let's turn that on. Yeah, that's better. Maybe I'd go for more of a muted kind of drop out of all the other tracks. I'd have to think about, for the actual final version of this, what I think sounds better. And then the effect comes off, everything comes back really prominently. You can hear all the different components again. We don't want beat repeat on here. This isn't definitely not a song that would be suited by having like a real structured drop, nothing like that. So if we think about how this one will be performed, I was toying with the idea of starting maybe with the choir synth. Maybe we start choir synth with the filter effect so it's muted and you don't really hear it. And then when the song starts up, it drops out and you have the bass line and the rhythm first and the choir synth comes in later. Just to kind of switch up the formula for how I structure these tracks. So if we did that, and we went about here, it would sound like... Sounds kind of like a bunch of really muffled, distorted voices singing. Let me go. Oh boy, it's a bit of a stretch for me to hit all these buttons at once. Maybe do something like that, or we kill the synth as the effect comes off. And then the official start of the track proper would be the rhythm and the bass line, and we fade in with the chorus. And bring in the fourth. And the fifth. Filter transition, all of them as a middle section. Dropping out the rhythm, the chord synth, and the signal synth. And maybe bring the big bat I think the idea of dropping out a couple different parts, not doing a dedicated part A and part B so much as a slight different combination of the instruments after the filter transition would be cool. As far as outro, and then maybe we end with the choir synth just like we started. That could be an idea. We'll go ahead and save our progress for that one. I will think about that one, especially after I get it recorded. It could be usable for the RPG project, kind of like an underground dungeon, or maybe like some sort of plotting or brooding type theme. Could work for that. It's not too far from Rock Dragon though, so if I think it's too similar in sort of style, then I probably won't include it for that particular project, because I don't want to just make like a sequel version of every track that was on Lost Kingdom Part 1. I definitely don't want to do that. So I'll have to give that some thought and see what makes the most sense there. But we can save everything onto a new track. Let's do another one. Okay. So let's clear everything off. And I'm going to turn off the boosts again and start messing around with some ideas, and then we'll come back together once we have something sort of put together for this one. All right, let's bring it back and talk a little bit about this one. This is kind of a weird one. Get rid of the distortion on the synth. So this one might require a bit of polishing later on. But with the beat, the first thing that I kind of set up here, I wanted something that was kind of more slow with like a drawn out rhythm, not something quite as like rapid or bouncy, which is how we ended up getting them. Kind of a slow, easy rhythm, and it only has really one heavy hit with the clap snare in there. And then with the bass line, I think it's the bass line that might be at odds with every other component of the song. That's what I was trying to mess with right at the end before I stopped and turned my mic back on. If you take out the bass, synth track 3 is this kind of harp-like plucked, simple 3-note run that repeats. It's actually kind of low in the mix, so I have to boost it up a bit, but it's meant to be in the background. Track 4. Track 4 is a harpsichord run. And then track 5 is organ chords. With that added in sounds like we'll drop out the harp for a sec. So with these 3 playing, this sounds like a kind of slow beat that's part of like a ritual. I was trying to think like a religious ritual or some sort of kind of ceremony. That's what it sounds like to me. But the bass line, which I did second, if we bring it in, it's not totally at odds dissonance wise, like it's not a completely separate set of notes, but it clashes to me kind of tonally with the other tracks that are playing. I have the harp turned off, just I put it on. So I don't know. I gotta think on this one. I think I need to give it some thought and marinate a little on it. I think the bass line might need to be changed. Like maybe instead of going note 1 step up then back down, it might need to be descending and start like the same note as the organ chord and then descend down in the same progression so it matches. I don't know. It's not completely out of place, but it's a little bit counterintuitive to the way it sounds. But I'm just trying to reverse it and see how weird that sounds. Yeah, no, definitely don't want to reverse it. That sounds worse. What if we try and give it like a string counter melody? I'm gonna turn the synth back on here. you're gonna hear some fuzz on the boost from the synth, but as I kind of mess around with it, I just want to see if the idea works, then maybe I'll add this in later. This is the same notes as the organ progression, but I think a half step or 1 octave down. It's close, but if we went lower, that might be too low for a bass line. This is a harmony note. That's not bad. Down first, and then up second. That's a possibility. Basically just going down 1 step, then up 1 step, and returning the same bass note. Where's my... What if I did 1 note bass lines for that? I feel like it's really close, but not quite the melody I want. I could. I could go for a string set on the bass line layer instead of an actual like literal bass. That's another possibility. So this one doesn't need a dedicated, bass instrument in the mix. Like all the tracks don't need that. If we went for a more orchestral sound, the only thing that is at odds, I don't think an orchestral kind of like cathedral-y sounding song should have a clap snare in it. So if we take the bass rhythm, that last clap before it repeats, the only snare in the whole thing, it really should be like a regular snare head. And I can't undo it without scrapping the entire thing and doing the rhythm from the top. So that's a little bit of a challenge. But I'm not opposed to the idea of putting in a string section where the bass line is now, and then having it complement the note progression of the organ chords. I feel like that might work a little bit better. It's a shame the loop station doesn't have the ability to go in and like break apart and edit components of a looped track. It just doesn't work that way. You have to re-record it. And if I delete and re-record it, I think it's going to sync the BPM to the second track. So maybe we're stuck with that clap snare for now. That's okay. This one, it's got potential, but I think it's going to require a bit more polishing and experimenting outside of the stream before it's in a state that I like. But it's definitely a different vibe compared to the first one, which was kind of the point. I wanted to try something different and see what the results were. Well, I think we'll call that a session for today. What I'd like to do after the stream, since I have all my stuff hooked up, is actually go into the recording mode for my computer and start capturing some of these loops that I've had sitting on here for a bit, and actually get them recorded and ready for future releases. And that's going to take some time. So instead of working on like a third track, I'm going to save my work on this one. This one is going to be a work in progress track. Maybe we'll pull it up on another stream, especially if I come up with an idea for how to flesh this one out and make it a little bit better. But in the meantime, I think we'll call that a session. Not the most productive, but some interesting ideas. I was taking a look at the raid list while I was saving my work here, and kind of a weird time of day, a little bit early. No one I know is actively online, so that's all right. Instead of raiding just someone random, we can go ahead and wrap up. What I'll do is I will mute this, and we'll go to outro. So yeah, I think interesting combination of talking through techniques, and hopefully the speed training and sound theory discussion was interesting to folks. I need to figure out my schedule for next week. Here in the States, we have a holiday on Tuesday, so I don't know if I'm going to be streaming that day. I might, because I've got some 4th of July related plans actually tomorrow, not Tuesday. Maybe I will set stream for Tuesday, and we'll be picking up on more of the gaming stuff next week. Probably Devil May Cry and Street Fighter, do like Capcom games next week again. I will figure that out. But until then, thanks to all the folks who hung out here. Hope everyone has a good rest of your weekend, and I will catch you in the next stream. See you later.